Thank you so much for the invitation to join you today. I think this is an extraordinarily timely conference. I also didn't check how I move this on. Yeah. I suppose the significance of this section, I think, is to really provide the broader global and continental context for the discussions that you're going to have. Lucy's going to do a deeper dive into the public sector and the implications of this for the public sector. But I'm really going to be looking at issues of digitalization and datification that are occurring very much intensifying at a global level, and really compel us to understand how all of these decisions we're making are can no longer just be made in a national context, that we very much need to get the economies of scope and scale for a data economy to be competitive by throwing our weight behind the single digital market and the African Continental Free Trade Area, harmonizing policies that are being rolled out through frameworks across the continent, which I'm going to refer to, but also understanding that this is very much a global market, and we've got to be more actively engaged in global governance. These issues of digitalization and datification have been identified by the UN Secretary General as one of two seismic shifts that will determine whether this century is going to result in greater inequality or greater equality. So how we govern both digitalization and the other is climate change will determine whether we are improving or exacerbating inequality. So contrary to a lot of the hype around AI and presentations of what's kind of happening in more mature economies, in fact, there's more evidence to demonstrate that these advanced data-driven technologies and digitalization are in fact exacerbating inequality. And as I said, this has become such an issue that during COVID we saw the extreme structural inequality that we see being exacerbated by people's inability to digitally substitute. And that is particularly in South Africa. I'll show you some of that data tomorrow. So people were unable, the most marginalized, even those who were barely online, not really able to digitally mitigate or digitally substitute for the risks associated, health risks and economic risks associated with the pandemic and lockdown, were most marginalized. And so the Secretary General, as part of the common agenda around post-economic reconstruction with post-COVID, has been mandated by the common agenda to produce a global digital compact that will be negotiated, or is being negotiated and will be endorsed at the Summit of the Future later this month. So central is digitalization seen to this, that we've got a special compact that is focusing on that. In South Africa, during the pandemic, President Ramaphosa also committed us to a new social compact that had digitalization at the core. And perhaps it's an opportunity to remind ourselves of that and to look at what empirical evidence we have to demonstrate that government is actually providing a new digital deal, which we've been calling for in response to that compact. So we've got very, very little time and a lot to cover, but I just wanted to deal with what I think in these global developments that are happening, and that's happening across the continent within the AU, various frameworks, policy frameworks that are being developed, is one of these most sort of wicked policy problems we have, and that is the digital inequality paradox. So despite some people getting more access through Aadhaar in India, actually digital inequality, as opposed to just the digital divide, is actually getting worse. And that really relates to the issue of the paradox relates to the increased, as we overlay increasingly advanced technologies over existing digital inequalities, which are themselves, as I said, a reflection of structural inequality. Inequalities are actually being amplified. And this is not only between those who are offline and online, as it was in the voice environment, but it's actually between those that have the technical and financial resources to use the internet actively or even to contribute to national prosperity, and those who are barely online, passively and intermittently consuming a narrow set of digital services, which the majority of South Africans are doing. So although we look very good when we look at connectivity figures across the continent, about 65-70% now, I'll show you the data tomorrow, of that 65 to 70%, only about 40%, 35 to 40% are meaningfully online, or actually using that for transacting, for contributing to livelihoods, etc. An important point about this is that as we go on and speak about, the AI hype and what AI is going to do and the panacea to all our problems, the real issue is that until we address these underlying digital inequalities, these are actually just perpetuated. So it's fine if you're using, generative AI or chat GPT for a very specific digitalized data environment in SARS. But you try using that for a school in Limpopo where you're trying to deal with this in, various languages, if you're trying to find out something, local knowledge that's not been digitized at all. So in fact, chat GPT has contributed significantly to inequality. And our own inability to address this, to have a digital policy, a transversal digital policy across government, again, as was said, probably driven from the presidency. It doesn't mean the presidency does all the policy and everything, but actually coordinating the levels of coordination we need between the public and private sector, across the public sector, to ensure that we can mobilize these technologies, deploy these technologies. We've got, for example, fantastic data scientists at the University of Pretoria, Vukosi Maravati, who is developing local language, large language modeling, and cannot get the data sets from our public broadcaster, the SABC, in order to develop these languages for GIS to communicate in the constitutionally official languages of our country. It just requires a few unblockages, and it could make such a difference. But that is all we can do at the national level. We're very much affected by what is happening at the regional level. And I wanted to just say very, very quickly through these slides, you can look at all these indexes, the Digital Readiness Index, the Digital the ICT Development Index of the ITU, all of these will show that Africa is lagging far behind. If you want to know where South Africa sits in the top performing African countries, Kenya was ranked 70th, South Africa 74, and Mauritius 76. Just for your information, on this index, in 1995, when we were developing the telecoms policy, South Korea, and South Africa were ranked 42 on that index. South Korea is now the top of the index, and we are at 74, okay? So we've had a whole lot of big challenges that South Korea hasn't had, but South Korea also had a whole lot of challenges that they've very successfully done through private investment, publicly driven private investments into their environment. So these issues that I mentioned back here, are really going to be coming up. They're very much part of the G20. The G20, of course, shifting from Brazil to South Africa, and an incredible opportunity for us, this Troika leadership of the G20, which has put a digital transformation agenda stamp on the G20 as it passed from India to Brazil and now to South Africa. And the issues there are exactly issues of data governance. In fact, Brazil is proposing a D20. So we've got the Think 20, we've got the Media 20. They're proposing a D20, a Data 20, because data is just really the glue of the economy and society now. I'm particularly wanting us to focus on the proper understanding of digital public goods, because I think as economists, this is absolutely critical to how we regulate this and how we ensure that all people have access to this valuable resource. The other issues are going to be information integrity, which relate to content and misinformation and fake news, but that's increasingly driven by viral AI and on digital platforms. And then, as has been mentioned, the big issue is going to be digital public infrastructures and how well are we prepared for that. At the continental level, this is very much what they're looking at. Just to say, we've got all these figures. We're way behind. So even if we look now in 2024, the latest figures, just out of the ITU temporary figures, we're looking at about 25-30%. And even these figures are very optimistic. When I show you the South African data, you'll see what a real demand survey shows us. And then again, I'm just going through these very quickly to show you that we used to be quite kind of complacent around what we looked like when we look at data centers in South Africa, for example. These basic data centers are now bottom rung, what you need in order to run a data economy or compete in a global economy. And just to show you this is from the AI Compute Index, which I unfortunately don't have a subscription to, so I can only use the slides are available, and it's very expensive. But this is just to show you this very high-powered computing that you need, that Melanie was referring to, in order to run these large language models, etc. But if you look at these, this was February 2024. You can see here that these are the biggest national private cloud and public cloud operators. And you could see the national high-power computing, we had at least some national players here. With this massive investment of Meta, just up until, just a few months, okay, 5 months, with this investment of Meta, they've kind of outstripped, they're magnitudes of scale bigger than anybody else. So you look at Tesla, Google, I mean, they're small fry in comparison. And then if you notice what is very significant about that, all these national computing power, it doesn't even show on the top 10. So no national government has the biggest computing power in the world any longer. And these will have magnitudes of scale more. So this is the kind of issues we're dealing with, not whether we've got a very nice data center somewhere in Africa. Okay, I'm not even going to go through this because I think you're kind of all aware of it. But the problems really are not just kind of certain amounts of internet connectivity or AI. We need to get to these critical masses. And these critical masses in the evidence have been determined by kind of number of connections on assumptions that people are always online, that people are actually transacting and doing. Across Africa, people are connected, but they're not doing very much. Their usage levels are very, very low. So we've probably got to get to critical masses, which we're seeing in the evidence, much greater, back to the old kind of voice levels of 40%, to see the network effects associated with GDP growth, etc. I just wanted to point you to this in the context of this meeting. It's a work that we did during COVID, on the COVID responses to equity, where we looked with Latin American partners and Asian partners at digitalization and the potential that increased digitalization offers to increasing visibility of individuals and firms to the state. Traditionally, this work has really been done around expanding one's tax base, and of course it has that very important function as well, because you've got to have something to redistribute. But during COVID, it was also about bringing informal sector firms, in-sector formal operators, people, unemployed, maybe even if they're getting grants, or if they're even getting permissions from other people, online through digitalization. And really sort of demonstrating how an appreciation of this in government and through government and a coordination would allow us to have better state formation. We'd be able to get better resource mobilization. We'd get this increased visibility through digitalization and datafication that would allow for the levels of digital substitution that you needed to get grants, to get feed yourself online, school online, work online, and that it would need to address some of these very profound digital inequalities that we see in the data that I'm going to show you tomorrow. So what I wanted us to do, and I don't think we have time, so I'm going to refer you to this. Sorry, and I see those dates have been left off. I'll pop them in there. But to understand that the internet, data, cybersecurity, and indeed global governance itself, these are public goods. Arguably merited goods, they are non-rivalrous, okay, in the fact that you can use them and it doesn't diminish anybody else using them. They've been made excludable because they're largely proprietary driven at the moment. A lot of the work that's been done on data and the data economy out of UNCTAD and ITU and UNCTAD and the World Bank has tended to focus, I think it's shifting now, I think the Information Lives of the Poor World Bank report already makes that shift from understanding data value creation as purely a commercial supply side issue, that's how you allocate the resources in order to get profits, to a more kind of Ostrom-like demand side valuation of data that allows you to build public value and, of course, see the social welfare gains of doing so across a government. So those investments might not be traditional kind of surpluses and rents, but it might be much greater well-being across your society. So I didn't actually put my timer on the end, so I'm going to ask you to give me a 2-minute when it's 2 minutes. I'm now going to just really run you through some of the continental developments, because over the last decade, there's been an enormous acknowledgement of global inequality. There's been a lot of focus on what a digital economy and then a data economy and now an AI general purpose driven economy might contribute to solving some of the really extreme inequalities that we see on the continent and that I was referring to, both within countries but also between countries. And there are a number of developments on the continent that have built together a really nice policy for the digital ecosystem. And of course, central to that, of course, is the Continental Free Trade Area. I'm not going to say much about that, except a lot of the positive stuff has been said. I think there's a lot of, we've written a lot about, and I've given you that reference, also, sorry, on the next slide, on the challenges around the digital protocols. So sorry, this is, you can just see where we stand globally in terms of e-commerce, and of course we've got the WTO moratorium on e-commerce, but in Africa we've got the digital protocols, part of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. Why we've gone into that in a kind of WTO-like secret, as if we're negotiating with hostile partners, instead of something like the European Union, where we're trying to create a common union, I don't know, but that's what we've done. The digital protocols, as they stand, almost word for word in the paper you'll see, taken from the WTO protocols, seriously undermine the recommendations and the principles of the African Union data policy framework, which seeks to redress not only the harms that were spoken about with these advanced technologies, but also the economic opportunities that need to be addressed. If we're going to be able to deploy these technologies to redress some of these inequalities, we really need to deal with the underlying economic issues, access to data, access to quality data. Of course, data protection, but that's kind of been individualized and dealt with just as, if you check the privacy box, then you're done. But what about actually allowing people to exercise those rights in order to enjoy, second generation rights as well? So the African Union has developed this digital transformation strategy for 2022 to 2030. It's already quite far down the line. It mandates the development of the data policy framework and the interoperability framework. And essentially what it does is, as I said, it creates the ecosystem that you need. Sorry, I'm there. The ecosystem that you need in order to run a data economy. So a lot of countries have actually had technical assistance on this, and so they've built these building blocks up very nicely. South Africa sort of started very early. We were one of the first countries to do POPIA. It took us 10 years to actually implement it. Now it's out of date. Other countries are. So we, in many ways, we look very patchwork. I'm working with the Gambia at the moment. Fantastic array of policy instruments in order to deliver in a digital economy. It's also got like so many people in it, but it's very fantastic. Anyway, so these cross-cutting themes, everybody's mentioned for digital public infrastructures, we need that broadband infrastructure, we need the data infrastructure, we need the digital ID, and very importantly, we need those online payments. We can't deliver those services without. Unless these are universally available, the only people who benefit from e-government services, from fantastic online tax services, are those who have all of those things in order to be able to be effective online. And then, of course, they're critical sectors: digital industry, digital trade, digital governance, digital education. We need an enabling environment, digital infrastructure, digital skills and capacity, and digital innovation and entrepreneurship. And basically, what they do is look at these foundational pillars, critical sectors, and these cross-cutting themes, and that's what you need for it. And then they've broken down this digital transformation strategy into a number of policies in order to implement that. We worked with the African Union on this data policy framework. It is an extremely progressive document. It's unlike what you'll see other data policy frameworks coming out of other parts of the world, because it starts off by acknowledging the foundational infrastructure we have to have in place, those 4 things I mentioned, that we have to have in place before we will be able to get this digital single market that we want, that we'll be able to have the cross-border data flows that we need for the continental free trade area. Basically, the data policy framework envisions the transformative potential of data to empower Africans, countries, improve people's lives, safeguard collective interests, protect data rights, drive equitable social and economic development. Very interestingly, in those principles, we managed to get in the concept of data justice, which has been a main project of the Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence that we've been working on. And that, as I said, is not only about responsible and ethical data or responsible and ethical AI. It's actually about redressing those inequities that make largely Africans on these very big global data sets invisible, discriminated against in automated decision-making, or underrepresented. Basically, this is being rolled out on the continent. It was part of a big EU-AU policy. Just to say that the number of policies that are happening at the moment, a lot of different donors with different agendas. Very often, the vacuum that is there is just filled by the donor who comes first, the donor thing. So some of these policies are unfortunately not aligned. As I said, with the digital protocols for the continental free trade area, no reference to this really enabling data policy framework. As I said, you can see here all of these elements that have, the whole ecosystem requires different kinds of data governance. Your market, your enabling environment here, in terms of your institutional arrangements, your competition commission needs to be able to talk to your consumer protection, needs to be able to talk to your economic regulator in relation to the data protection or information regulator. We've got a fantastic one. We're very, very lucky. And we've also got access to information, which is an important part of that balance of privacy. Many other countries don't. And then we've got all of these critical issues around sovereignty, data localization, and then, of course, open data and getting cross-border data flows. Very importantly, the other common agenda, a digital transformation agenda mandate was to develop the interoperability framework. So you've got the data policy framework, you've got the interoperable framework for digital ID. Essentially, this has really struggled because of countries' issues around sovereignty and various things. Basically, it just tries to get interoperability. Of course, until we sort out our rather bizarre human mobility constraints on the continent, this might all be a bit of a myth. But basically, what it tries to do that is by looking at what you would need to have in place from a business point of view, from the technical requirements, operational requirements, and legal requirements. Many countries, again, have had support on all of these. These are now building blocks for them to build the data economy. And then just to say, again, of course, AI, whole sorts of funders, and also things. We've got an AI blueprint from Smart Africa, World Economic Forum type document, mainly geared at the private sector. We've got the AI strategy, which has just come out, driven by UNESCO's Responsible AI Ethics, basically overtook our NEPAD's white paper on AI, which was sponsored by IDRC and various other sovereign funds. So, and then in South Africa, we've got our National Department of Communications and Digital Technologies developing an AI paper. We've got Science and Innovation developing another paper. And, so this has to come together. I mean, this is not going to work unless we bring this all together. So that was just really very, very positive. You need to go back to all those documents now and look at all the things that they're trying to do. But there really is this really remarkable framework, this real window of opportunity for building this single digital market, and of course common market more generally, to which digital is the underpinning. Unless we get the digital single market sorted out, there is no common market. Just whether it's cross-border trade information or not even digital services or anything. So it's absolutely critical that we get this right. But there is that framework there. I'm often in those forums and we don't participate enough. We need to, especially in the context of G20, African Union's organizational membership of the G20 as from this year, very much looking to us to support this progressive integrated agenda that we've had with the Troika leadership of the G20. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alison. Thank you so much. You can have a seat here. We'll talk to you soon. That was Alison from the Executive Director of Research ICT Africa at the University of Cape Town's Nelson Mandela School of Public Governance. One more time, please give it up for Alison. So keep your questions for now. Just keep typing them on Slido. Those that are joining us online can do so as well. Type your questions on Slido if you have any for Alison. And also, those that are here, you can also do so. Type your questions on Slido. Any question really goes, we'll be able to read it out loud to everyone. But also, if you hear, I'm using a lot of alsos. Is anyone counting my alsos? I've been saying also the whole morning. Anyway, if you are here, you have an opportunity to use a microphone to ask questions. But we'll do that after we have Lucy joining us online. Lucy should be online joining us. Lucy, known to you and I as Lucy, but Home Affairs know her as Lucienne Abrahams, who's the director of Link Center, University of the Witwatersrand. She's joining us online to give us also an expert talk on understanding the complexities of technology. Lucy, thank you so much for joining us. Good to have you with us. Can you hear us?
I can.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm round of applause for Lucy. Over to you, Lucy.
Greetings, everyone. Good morning. I'd like to talk about a public sector perspective. The public sector is a very diverse kind of institution, multiple institutions. So when we think of digitalization and digital futures, what are these digital futures being driven by, whether in South Africa or elsewhere on the continent? And we could say that they are being driven by use cases. What is the usefulness or the particular specific use of digitalizing anything in the public sector? Where's the value, the social value? We understand something like mobile money. We know what the value is. What is the value of a digital future for education or health or any aspect of public service? And so what's becoming increasingly interesting is how modular methodologies are being applied. So when Alison refers to digital public infrastructures or digital public goods, what we really think about is a kind of a module. I think everyone in the audience is very modular, because when we study, we're studying modules and they have a particular design and they have a particular symmetry. And so to deal with this complexity, which is often very complicated, it's very complicated to build digital government or digital education or digital health. These modular methodologies, which are for now enshrined in something called GovStack. This is what many institutions across the public sector this is the approach that people are using. We can move the slides along away from the first slide. Yes, so there in front of us, we have a perspective of GovStack, and you can see the modules and the layers. Well, you see the layers in the diagram, and within each layer, there are multiple modules. Let's move to the next slide. So if we want to apply modular methodologies that can make things, or can make building digital government not simple, but simpler than each country doing it alone, we need to think about at least three things. And I've chosen for our discussion this morning to talk about assemblages, affordances, and agency. And we're going to be talking a lot about agency. So assemblages would be these modules. So for example, we can have a digital identity module. And that digital identity module is, let's just call it a template. It's a software template, and it can be used and reused and improved by many institutions, not each having to invent their own digital identity system for their country. That would be an assemblage. Then we can talk about affordances. So in other words, what do those assemblages enable us to do? What can we do? Well, we can build digital identity systems much more quickly than if we did it alone. And we can use digital identity for multiple services, digital health, digital education, all kinds of services, because digital identity would be a requirement for each of those quite distinct services. And then very importantly, agency, the capability to act, the capability to build with or without modular methodologies. But I'll talk a little bit more about the advantages of modular methodologies when we are trying to advance significant numbers of people, have significant numbers of people, millions of professional developers across the continent, not thousands. So that's where agency comes in. We are the agents. We have to be the agents of our own digital development. Let's move to the next slide. This is a bit of a busy slide, but I'm going to try to simplify it. It simply suggests that there are multiple layers, multiple institutional behaviors and conditionalities that are required to operate something like GovStack. GovStack is at the early stages of its evolution. It has a few use cases. The Digital Public Goods Registry has 161 items, including building blocks. But this is far from where we might end with a modular methodology for building digital government. I want to focus on one or two things, particularly the idea, I think it is in layer 4, the idea of digital multilingualism, human and artificial intelligence. And what that means is that everyone, as far as possible, must have capability in a particular field, as well as in the digital capabilities required for that field. So if throughout the education system, from primary to tertiary level, the person is becoming a teacher, a nurse, a professional of any kind, that person will have knowledge of the particular professional skills, an administrator, an HR professional. But the person will also have knowledge and capability of the digital skills to function in that environment. And in the future, to function not only as a human collaborating with digital technologies, but a human collaborating with multiple digital technologies, including artificial intelligence. So we can talk about human intelligences and artificial intelligences. And what's really important is that if we are to break the digital divide, and I hold a similar view to Alison, that governments in particular, but all institutions, universities in particular, must act in ways that break down this divide in capability, this single lingualism, where we are only taught very narrow knowledges, and our digital multilingualism is very limited, because that contributes to the digital divide. The efforts in the education system to introduce digital technologies have been relatively weak, so that needs to change. And then I want to just shift to the right-hand side of this diagram very quickly, where we're talking about specific kinds of capabilities. On the extreme right, data services capabilities, development and support capabilities, and coordination capabilities in what I'd like to call a shared services environment. So across the African continent, including in South Africa, we have these shared services entities. In South Africa, it's called the State Information Technology Agency, SITA. Many of these institutions are not yet fit for purpose to really operate and build digital government extensively. Therefore, we need to understand what the capability requirements are. Let's move to the next slide. Next slide, please. Okay. Sorry, no, not that one. Just back one. The one with the, there we go, yes. At least one of the key foundations is coding skills, just the capability to program and fix and amend and adjust and continuously revise. And there are multiple environments within which coding skills is being developed. And that ecosystem, when you look at the slide, it looks like a bit of an amoeba. It looks like it goes everywhere. And yet it's just not enough. It's just very far from enough. Even with, we often say, you know, there are close to 700 technology hubs on the continent in many of the major cities. And we'll see that slide in a moment. And yet it's not enough. It's just very far away from enough. Next slide, please. Yes, that one. So on the right-hand side of the diagram, we see the map of Africa with some of those over 700 technology hubs, or more fondly called tech hubs. And those are spaces not only where young people learn to code, but where they are actively engaged in building their startup businesses, communities of startups, accelerators, incubators, incubating new ideas, both software and hardware, in things called maker spaces. And on the left-hand side of the slide, we see some of the capabilities that are either currently being built or where there could be much more dedicated focus on building those skills. Because where do we go if we want to build digital government capabilities? Isn't any particular place one can go. Software engineering tends to be quite broad, taught at universities, in engineering departments or software engineering schools. But there's very limited, dedicated focus. Prof. Tanya Ajam has a degree program at Stellenbosch University that focuses on public finance and public economics, and she incorporates this digital component But we really need to see much more dedicated capacity building at universities, tech hubs, industry, around digital government. Next slide, please. Yes, so I hope you can see the fine print there, but very important in that fine print is if we look at the statistics for South Africa and for the rest of Africa, the statistics indicate very small numbers. I think it's 119,000 professional developers in South Africa. Maybe it's 150,000 now, 690,000 professional developers for the whole of Africa. As we can see, those numbers are really, really small compared to even just an estimated size for building digital government. We would need to have maybe 1.5 million professional developers or more just for digital government. And that number is really a thumbs up. We could say many millions because, for example, we don't only need professional developers for digital government applications in general. If we think about the field of cybersecurity alone, we probably need very large numbers of professional developers just on the cybersecurity side. Let's move to the next slide, please. I am watching the time. Right. So just a quick, not diversion really, but to talk about artificial intelligence enabling education as a use case, a specific use case. If we're saying that each new technology leads to another digital divide, yet another digital divide, and a lot of research suggests that we now have 4 or more kinds of digital divide, and we might add AI as a 5th or 6th digital divide. And then here are some of the other, or some of the more specific problems with that digital divide. A lot of what we're doing with technology is pure substitution. Just saying, well, instead of having a teacher in the classroom, let's substitute that teacher with AI, or let's have a combination of AI-based content and the teacher in the classroom. But that's a very passive engagement with very advanced, very sophisticated tools. So that's in the bottom left-hand corner of this quadrant diagram. And you can see passive, human techno capabilities, and passive modes of learning. And that's the biggest problem with learning across South Africa and many parts of Africa, is that learning is passive. And passive learning is one of the reasons for the significant failure rates that we see. So if we move to the right lower quadrant of the diagram, the key word there is augmentation. How do we augment the learning experience? By making it more active. Then we can move back to the left-hand side of the diagram, upper quadrant. Passive human techno capabilities, but more active modes of learning. So we want to modify the learning experience. We want to use visualization, for example. And there are really excellent free open source programs like GeoGebra, which is short for geometry and algebra, and which create a visual engagement with mathematics learning. And it's fun, and it's a game, and it's gamified. And teachers and learners can play. Now, I'm sure the idea of playing while learning maths is an idea that isn't real for many teachers and many learners. But this is exactly what we want. We want dynamic capabilities. And in the top right-hand corner, the active-active quadrant, we want to completely redefine the learning experience. So outside of that bottom left-hand quadrant, all the other quadrants, augmentation, modification, and redefinition, really foresee much greater teacher and learner engagement. And what that requires is, coming back to the point about digital multilingualism, that a maths teacher certainly needs to understand maths, but a maths teacher also needs to be able to code and develop and build applets that make learning more meaningful, more contextual for learners in particular countries. So we can use GeoGebra, and there are thousands of applets to choose from. Well, hundreds at least. But our maths teachers need to contextualize that for our learners, whether in South Africa, Kenya, Nigeria, Senegal. And that requires additional coding skills and capabilities. I'm going to move to the next slide, please. And we'll soon be reaching the end. This is really just to look at. The slides will be shared with you. And we suggest this notion of end games. We can have different end games, depending on how active or how passive our engagement is with AI in education. The notion of an end game comes from chess. Chess players will know this. And of course, the end game is you need to foresee what that future is. The chess player, professional chess players can see the end game many moves ahead. So when we're thinking of AI enablement, whether in education or any other field, we need to foresee the end game, because the end game will influence the moves we make now, in the next 3 years, the next 5 years, the next 10 years. And of course, as we also know, the end game isn't actually the end. It's just about seeing into the future, seeing that digital future, so that we can organize ourselves better, we can be more capable. But one end game always leads to a new game. Let's move to the next slide. I think these are the last 2 slides in the presentation. Also quite busy slides. And they are really just setting out. If we have this particular high-level visualization of how we might move better, more efficiently, more effectively in the digital government space, by continuously building use cases, by advancing the capabilities of shared services entities, by using modular methodologies like GovStack, by in particular building digital multilingualism, and then all the other technology components, the middleware, the building blocks, the DPIs, the network infrastructure, we still need to assess our digital capabilities. So on the right-hand side, numbered 1 to 10, are a list of some of the key capabilities that would be relevant to each of the layers in this high-level visualization. And then the final slide, thank you. Next one. The final slide relates to, if we were to apply this in the tech hub environment, the more informal, more open environment outside of the formality of the public sector, what are other digital skills and capabilities that would be useful in that context? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lucy, for the interesting, insightful presentation that you just given us there online. We highly appreciate it. Just remember, we also had Alison giving us a presentation. I'll invite you back on stage, Alison, to take a few questions. But before that, let's give it up for Lucy one more time. All right, we have a number of questions, I think a few, on a platform called Slido, and we're gonna take some of the questions again here in the audience. If you do have your questions, please have them ready. We'll have a mic coming to you, but we highly encourage you to use Slido to type in your questions coming from there. Also online, they can do so to type their questions in. We have the first one, Alison, I think, from Noluvo Blom. Noluvo Blom, I'm not sure if Noluvo Blom is here or online, but she's asking, how can the future technological advancement be leveraged to reduce rather than increase digital inequalities? That is Noluvo Blom. Maybe whilst you think about that, let me also to you, Lucy, let me try and see if this maybe goes to you. What, again, from Noluvo Blom, what are the main reasons that governments struggle to exert authority over high cloud computing services? Justin Visache coming in there and really asking, can you give concrete examples of how AI will exacerbate Africa's digital inequalities? How can we change this? This is to you, Alison. Can you, Alison, give us concrete examples of how AI will exacerbate African digital inequalities? How can we change this? Let's take these three questions and then we'll move on to the rest of the questions. Starting with you, Alison, of course.
Thank you very much for those questions. Basically, I would require a thesis to answer how we redress digital inequality and how we redress the inequalities that are manifest, digital inequalities that are manifest in AI. I will refer you, however, to some work that we did within the Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence, a work stream on data justice as a basis for AI justice. Let me explain why why digital inequality, and I'm particularly using that to capture the non-supply side structural problems. You will see when we do the empirical evidence tomorrow that the main drivers of digital inequality, or the main determinants of digital inequality, are education. Education and the correlated income factors of income. So when you see gender disparities, for example, it's because girls aren't staying in school, or because girls are leaving higher education to have children, those kinds of things. It's not the gender in and of itself, although of course there are cultural and non-visible empirical factors that would be at play there, or non-statistical factors that might be at play. So what we need to do is, as I said, not only focus on some of the compliance regulation that allows us to address some of the harms, like privacy, but also acknowledge that there are harms caused simply by exclusion. So simply by large numbers, the majority of Africans simply not being in the giant data sets that are used to create these million-dollar industries that you saw here, means that when they are used for all sorts of decision-making, financial decisions, decisions around how climate change is going to be, so resources are going to be allocated, all sorts of things that are using these very big data public sets when they can get access to them, but those companies are using them for themselves. We see that, and they're very successful audits done by, in fact, I should point out, absolutely fantastic leading Black women data scientists. I think many of you will have known of Timnit Gebru, Ethiopia, Joy Bolawemi, and of course Abebe Birhani, who do these big audit data sets that demonstrate how these data sets perpetuate historical injustices of misrepresentation, of stereotype, of when they look at, Sophia Noble looks at these big data sets, internet data sets looking, for example, under the labeling of Black women, the majority, the overwhelming majority, so over 70%, is actually pornographic content. That is what the internet is telling us about Black women. The remaining are, bare-breasted Black women in fields from the previous century or whatever. So these, that we just taken for granted, the information that we get on ChatGPT, this is taken from the data sets of those people who are already online and the websites and the browsers and things that are already there. 90% of the content is in English. As I said, you're simply not, by enabling those people who already have access to that, who are wanting to look for content that the ChatGPT is able to manipulate and to present to you, actually makes those people more enabled. So, university students in the US, for example, who are wanting to use ChatGPT, or in the tax department to use ChatGPT more effectively to do work, actually are becoming more enabled than people who are, at University of Transkei anthropology department, who might be wanting to look up something in isiXhosa or something like that. So it's really systemic, and that's why just these ethical frameworks, ethics by design, or these harm frameworks really can't deal with these systemic and structural inequalities that make AI not reduce access to these digital services, as is often presented in some of the hype.
Thanks so much, Alison. Let's maybe, Lucy, you want to take quickly, I'm not sure if that's relevant to you, but there was a question asked around the main reason governments struggle to exert authority over a high cloud computing service.
Yes, of course. I think there are two key reasons. Firstly, cloud computing developers, the owners and the infrastructure builders, are mainly not located on the African continent. They are not indigenous companies. They're not companies indigenous to African countries. They are global companies, or companies with head offices located in the North, in the US, in Europe, in Japan, in China. And so the operations of those cloud providers isn't located in a country where the country may wish to apply certain rules or laws or regulation. So if the institutions do not fall, if these organizations, these service providers, their operations do not fall within your country context, your country jurisdiction, then it's quite difficult to design laws and regulations, but it's not impossible. And so my second comment would be in the form of a question.
Yeah.
Do governments really struggle, or are they not working hard enough, creatively enough? Because there's always a solution. But in order to find solutions for the ways in which digital technologies operate today, where they are boundaryless, we have to work a bit harder. We have to think a bit more carefully about what is possible, and learn. We have to learn from other jurisdictions. To some extent, we have in South Africa. If we look at questions of data protection, where data is hosted outside the boundaries of South Africa, we have learned from the EU General Data Protection Regulation. We have a fair facsimile of that called the POPI Act, but we took a very long time to bring it into operation. And so we really need to look at ourselves and ask ourselves whether we're working hard enough and smart enough for this digital era, where speed is everything. Thanks.
Right. Thank you so much, Lucy.
One sentence.
All right, one sentence from Alison just to wrap it up for us.
Sorry, I just
Go
wanted
ahead.
to, just that question about yes, it's terrible, what can we do about it?
Yeah.
And to build onto what Lucy said. So, if we're saying what can we do right now, I mentioned the African Data Policy Framework.
Correct.
Looks at how we can leverage data governance. And of course, this is way beyond data protection. Data protection, as you saw on that big ecosystem, is just one aspect of what we need to do.
Right.
It's really about unleashing the economic potential. What can governments do in particular? Governments can ensure that they're obviously non-confidential, their government data is made open in a manipulatable format, that researchers, that entrepreneurs, and this is being done in Asia, can use that data in order to contribute to value creation for the economy. What we also propose within the African Union Data Policy Framework, that this is done within the common market, so that we are sharing data for research purposes, for economic value creation
Right.
on the continent,
Yeah.
between countries, so that we can get the economies of scope and scale that we need.
Yeah.
Now, we've done that. We've, at the same time, with the digital protocols, signed off on a WTO-type most favored nation, et cetera, that prevents us from doing that in a way that doesn't allow us or doesn't make us also share it with Meta and Facebook and everybody else, who we actually, challenge to there's no way we'd be able to
Yeah.
beat them. So we really need to look at how very practically we can economically regulate in this country. How can we get access to data? How can we get access, as the European Union did during COVID, when
Right.
Meta and Facebook said you couldn't
Yeah.
do it? They actually said, well, we need this in the public interest. And now it's in the European Union law that all researchers have to be able to get
Yeah.
access to that data, and they can't operate there unless they do that. We can piggyback on that.
Sure. Definitely
Thank
can
you.
piggyback on that. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That was Alison and Lucy. Please, a warm round for them.